Engaging multiple perspectives and keeping everyone at the table. How do we develop a more complex ability to have some of these very challenging conversations with each other across our differences? That's the question of the day. So we got three kind of meaty terms here. Normalize the social construction of knowledge, engage multiple racial points of view, and surface critical perspective. And I think the trickiest one here is this social construction of knowledge piece, because a lot of people are like, what specifically does that mean? I think we can all get our heads around multiple racial points of view and critical perspective, but the social construction of knowledge is a bit tricky. So we have a couple definitions. Social construction of knowledge is knowledge, perspectives, and belief systems, and awareness that these are all created by our experiences, histories, and cultural backgrounds. In other words, our truths and our facts are mediated by the experiences we've had, the families we grew up in, the stories we were told, the stories that we develop over our lifetimes. And so everybody's going to have a slightly different version of how any given situation is happening, the reasons why, and what to do. So an example of this that's a little bit, perhaps a little bit less tense than race, everybody used to think the Earth was flat, right? This was science. This was hard science and hard fact. Over time, we realized that that was not indeed the case. So we would say then that this belief system about how the Earth worked at one time, this was socially constructed. And that now our belief system that the Earth is round is also socially constructed. Now, with science, it's a little bit trickier because we believe that and it's a firm belief. Maybe someday we'll discover something else. But in social sciences, because we're dealing with humans, human belief systems, they're always in flux because we're different and we're having different experiences. Essential points from chapter 7, that there's a dominant perspective, and with that dominant perspective, also a dominant narrative, and we're going to get into that. We're really going to dig into this dominant perspective and counter-narrative today. The bigger picture, if we don't engage multiple perspectives, the dominant perspectives are likely to be considered as the only truth. So perhaps from your experience, you can see how you think your truth could be the only one, right? You could see how you could believe that in the absence of engaging with other people. And that's why we're all together. That's why we continue to have conversations about this, because otherwise, truths get solidified in our own minds. But lastly, in order to engage multiple perspectives, we have to deal with the discomfort of suspending our judgment, right? So if I say something to you that's a part of my experience that's challenging for you to hear, you have to kind of pause, and before judging and saying that couldn't possibly have happened, or it couldn't possibly be that way, you kind of have to sit back, right, and think, okay, maybe. And I've asked the other groups, when do you do this in your daily work? Because I think you all do. Suspend your judgment. In what instances are you called upon to suspend your judgment? I need a volunteer. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. And what, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Can you give me an example? Yeah, okay. Let me re-ask the question and then I'll get two responses. So in what moments do you have to suspend your judgment in order to be an effective leader?
When a parent or another stakeholder is bringing a situation to my desk and wants to discuss it and talk about it or solve a problem.
Right. And particularly, what specifically moment do you need to suspend judgment?
Well, the moment that they come in, and I don't want to make a prejudgment on what I might have heard from other people, what I might have witnessed or experienced about the situation previously.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
Listen to what they have to say.
Right. Yep, that's a perfect example. Stella, did you have something?
A lot of times we talk about suspending judgment on kids, like previously if they've been in trouble, if something happens to them, sometimes like, well, you know, what did you do? Kind of suspending that judgment of their past.
Right.
And just really looking at it and isolate it like something might have happened where you didn't provoke it or whatever. Or even in the teachers, like if you know a teacher can be difficult or militant and a student is feeling picked on, suspending that judgment from like the student, even if they're difficult, like maybe they are feeling something that's real.
Most definitely. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, last example.
I think also when you have varying socioeconomic background, suspending judgment when you look at one group or another and not automatically assuming that, you know, this type of kid or this type of family fits in this box because they may be in poverty. So suspending the judgment so you can provide those services.
Yeah. So these are all great examples of how you're already doing this. There's one more hand. Ms. Freeman, who are you pointing at?
Mr. Armstrong.
No, they did good.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so you have great examples. You're doing this all the time, but within the context of race, it's trickier because you're deeply emotionally involved. Okay, I won't say you. I am deeply emotionally involved in my understanding of race because it affects so much of the work that I do. And when somebody challenges me to pause and think, maybe they're right. Let me hear them out. It's very tricky. This book has kind of a protocol for how to listen and do racial listening, which I think is really helpful and effective. But some of the first step is to get that background knowledge. And then the second step is what we're moving towards, which is this personal narrative. Where do I fit into the story of race? So we're going to work with one of these dominant narratives. And again, if the narrative makes sense to you and your experiences, and you've seen it in action, it may not appear to be a dominant narrative, but it's a narrative that we all learn. It's called meritocracy, right? But everybody's a little bit more familiar with the term American dream. So the definition of meritocracy is a social, political, or economic system in which success is determined solely on the merits of one's hard work, skills developed, and natural aptitudes. And I'd like to do a little bit of an exercise on this. Before we get started on this activity, does anybody have questions specifically about the American dream narrative? You know, Horatio Alger, if you can dream it, you can achieve it. Hard work will eventually yield success. Any questions about what either of these terms mean? So we'll do just this brief activity, and I want you to take a couple minutes, like really 2, to write down an answer to the following questions. And again, it's going to be, you can volunteer to share out if you want to or not. So write whatever you're feeling or thinking. In what ways have your experiences and the experiences of people you know confirmed or denied the truth of the narrative of meritocracy and the American dream? What's a narrative that stands in contrast to that dominant narrative? And what emotions does the counter-narrative evoke in you? So 2 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. We're going to stick to 2 minutes. If you are willing to share out with a shoulder partner for 1 minute, the one most important thing that you wrote in the last 2 minutes, and we'll take 1 minute to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and come back together. If we could have 2 people share out. If 2 people are willing to share out something that they felt was important in their conversation. It's a lot of talk, not a lot of volunteering. If no one wants to, we have 2. Fabulous. Okay, thank you.
It was funny because ours were very similar when we talked about our own experiences. And it was, you know, kind of the motto of hard work equals success, or hard work pays off. And so what we put into achieving that, you know, trying to get that back was one of the things that we talked about. And both of us were sort of raised with that philosophy of, you know, hard work equals success, or hard work pays off.
Okay,
to reach that dream.
Thank you. Yes.
And, go on. No, you go. And one of the things we discussed was hard work doesn't necessarily equate that American dream. That, you know, we've learned you have to work harder and have to carry yourself a certain way.
Who has to work harder? When you say we. You gotta be
Minorities.
specific. Okay.
Have to work harder, have to carry yourself a certain way in order to achieve that American dream.
It's a crucial point that's come up in all of the conversations we've had so far. Was there anyone else? Ms. Wise.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Kevin and I shared a similar story. We're both the first generation of college grads, so we would say, oh, we believe the American dream. You work hard and you achieve, and we get nice big people jobs. But now the more I learn, I realize that I may have had some unearned advantages that helped me go through that path that someone else doesn't have.
Which doesn't diminish the hard work, right? So if you work hard, you may be able to get there. You may have some unearned advantages on your side, right? Your dominant narrative of the American dream, if you grew up in conditions of poverty and you really worked really, really hard, some of these dominant narratives are going to be, you're going to even feel a little bit of distance from that, right? So your approach to the dominant narrative is sort of on a spectrum, but it still exists and it still serves a function. So we kind of want to talk about what the function of that is, and then maybe some of the counter narratives. I'm going to show you a video. And it's going to help, I think, to start a little bit of a conversation. I found that a lot of people who've watched the video maybe were not so familiar with this aspect of history. And sometimes in not understanding some of the ways that this has played out historically, how race has played out historically, and how things like privilege have played out historically, it's very difficult to hear that this is a dominant narrative, and it's very difficult to understand any of the counter narratives that exist.